Welcome to the Stellar Vault. Say hi in the comments to awaken the archive. Then like, subscribe, and let the tale begin.
Commander Reth Voshan did not believe in ghosts, which was unfortunate, because the reactor signature on the drifting freighter belonged to a man who had died 14 years ago. The nebula made verification difficult. Electromagnetic interference blurred sensor returns and fractured long-range scans into static. But reactor signatures were harder to disguise. Power cores left patterns, thermal echoes, harmonic fluctuations, microscopic inconsistencies that persisted even after refits and repairs. This one matched a Korvathi military-grade reactor lost during the enforcement action at Harrow's Reach. And it was currently sitting at the center of the interference field, engines cold, surrounded by 6 coalition warships, 2 destroyers, 3 interceptors, and the dreadnought Accord's will. They had entered the nebula knowing their targeting would degrade. They had followed him in anyway. Because treaties did not enforce themselves. Because ghosts did not frighten fleets. Because if Captain Idris Croy was alive, then Harrow's Reach was not as finished as the coalition had declared. Voshan kept his hands folded behind his back as the Accord's will held position at the outer edge of the interference band. The nebula was a bruised wall of ionized gas and drifting particulate, thick enough to scatter targeting solutions and distort range calculations. Inside it, the freighter drifted without broadcasting a single identifier. No distress call, no transponder, no defensive posture, a ship assembled from stolen parts and stubbornness. Open broadband, Voshan said. The channel flared across all coalition frequencies. Unregistered vessel. You are in violation of the Cathara Treaty, Article 19. Prohibition of armed human-operated craft in coalition space. Power down all systems and prepare for boarding. This is your single warning. Silence answered him, not static, not interference, just the absence of reply. Voshan let 5 seconds pass. He wanted the recording to show restraint. The tribunal would review this. They always did. Boarding teams, deploy. 3 breaching pods launched from the destroyer Talon's edge, engines flaring blue against the nebular haze. Each pod carried 8 Korvathi shock troops in powered assault frames, reinforced thorax plating, magnetic boots, servo-assisted gauntlets designed to rip through bulkheads or bone with equal efficiency. They struck the freighter at 3 vectors: port cargo bay, starboard engineering access, dorsal maintenance hatch. Magnetic clamps locked. Cutting torches bit into hull plating that had already been welded and rewelded a dozen times. Inside the port breach, Sergeant Gray dropped first. The cargo hold smelled of heated alloy and old lubricant. Not abandoned, maintained. Crates were secured with precision. Tools were hung on racks. Nothing floated loose. Portside team is through, Gray reported. No visible resistance. His visor display mapped the chamber. Life signs, none. Reactor output, minimal. Atmosphere, stable. The place did not feel derelict. It felt paused. Proceed to bridge. All teams converge, command replied. The corridors narrowed as they advanced. Human scale, compact, efficient. Exposed conduits ran along the ceiling in bundled clusters. Some Korvathi, some Dren, some unmistakably human. Gray brushed a wall as he passed. The metal was warm. They turned a corner. A wall panel bore hundreds of shallow hash marks carved into the alloy, some deep, some faint. Lines grouped in sets of 5, then broken, then resumed. Gray slowed half a step. He did not ask what was being counted. They moved on. Starboard team reported identical findings. No crew, no weapons, no movement. The dorsal team reached what appeared to be a mess hall. 1 metal table bolted to the deck. 1 chair, 1 plate. Empty. Single occupant confirmed, came the dorsal report. Vessel appears to be solo-operated. On the bridge of the Accord's will, Voshan allowed himself a slow exhale. A relic, then. One man in a salvaged coffin defying a treaty he could not possibly challenge. "Locate the bridge," Voshan ordered. "Bring the pilot alive if possible. Identification for tribunal confirmation." Gray's squad reached a central junction. 3 passages. Forward to bridge access, down toward reactor level, aft toward lower cargo. Standard freighter configuration. Then the lights went out. Not flickered. Extinguished. Gray's visor switched automatically to thermal overlay. The corridor ahead glowed in muted gradients. The corridor behind. He blinked. The rear bulkhead was closer. 4 meters closer. Steel where air had been. "Command," Gray said carefully. "The corridor geometry has changed." A pause. "Clarify. The bulkhead behind us has advanced approximately 4 meters. Before Command responded, the starboard channel erupted. "Contact! The walls are moving. Repeat. The walls are reconfiguring. We're being isolated." A tremor passed through the deck. The trooper at Gray's rear shouted once as the floor beneath him retracted in a single smooth motion. The entire plating section withdrew on silent rails. He dropped into darkness. The floor sealed. Gray spun, weapon raised. A section of wall unfolded beside them, alloy plates separating along seams too precise to have been visible seconds before. Behind it waited a turret. Compact, tri-barrel rotary. Dren design. Gray knew it. He had seen those guns tear through Korvathi armor at the siege of Vethak. It fired once. A concussive pulse struck the corridor like a physical blow. 3 of his squad hit the opposite wall hard enough to dent it. They did not rise. The wall folded closed again, seamless. The corridor shifted, not violently, deliberately. The forward path narrowed. The ceiling dropped. Side panels sealed. They were no longer advancing through the ship. They were inside a mechanism. "Weapons free!" Gray ordered. But there was nothing visible to fire at. The ship did not fight them. It rearranged around them. "Somewhere deeper in the hull," another squad screamed. Then silence. On the Accord's will, telemetry collapsed into fragments. Starboard team, lost. Dorsal team, signals fragmenting. Interior schematics no longer matching expected layouts. Port team, 5 active signals. Then 4. Then 3. "Recall boarding teams," Voshan said. "Commander." His intelligence officer did not look up from the display. "We've isolated the freighter's reactor harmonics." "And?" "It matches a Korvathi military corps lost during the enforcement action at Harrow's Reach." The bridge quieted. Just the subtle stillness that follows a name no one likes to hear, spoken aloud. "Harrow's Reach was sterilized," Voshan said. "Yes, Commander." "Run facial recognition on the pilot. Use the colony census archive." 11 seconds later, the result filled the central display. A younger face, unscarred, both eyes intact. Captain Idris Croy, Colony Defense Militia, status KIA during orbital bombardment. Harrow's Reach. Voshan studied the image, then the freighter, then the reactor signature that should not exist. "He's been dead for 14 years. "Apparently not, Commander." Voshan straightened. "All ships, charge primary batteries. Prepare annihilation bombardment." A pause. "I want that freighter reduced to atoms." Inside the Nomad's wrath, corridors continued to shift. Somewhere in the sealed compartments of the lower decks, Korvathi shock troops beat against bulkheads that would not reopen. On a bridge no boarding team would ever reach. A man with burn scars crossing half his face watched 6 coalition warships power weapons that had ended a war. He did not answer the hail. He did not reach for evasive controls. He waited. The first salvo hit the Nomad's wrath amidships. The freighter bucked, hull plates screaming. Korvathi shielding, bolted to the port side in uneven slabs, absorbed the kinetic rounds and dispersed the energy across the stolen plating. The metal glowed white, then cooled, held. It would not hold again. Hairline fractures spiderwebbed across the plating where the rounds had struck. Micro-venting. Tiny jets of trapped atmosphere bleeding through compromised seams. Not enough to trigger a breach alarm. Enough that Croy noticed the pressure gauge on the portside environmental monitor drop by a fraction. He'd welded that plating himself, 67 hours in a dead orbit above the scuttled remains of the KSS Unbroken, cutting panels free with a salvage torch, while the hull cooled around the bodies of the crew who'd abandoned it. He remembered the weight of each slab as the freighter's cargo arm dragged it into place. He remembered it took 4 months to bolt them flush, working alone, because there was no one else. Now those panels were cracking. Croy's hands moved across a console that looked like it had been assembled from 5 different species control interfaces, because it had. Korvathi targeting, Dren weapons management, Yashti navigational overlay. The labels were in those languages. He read all of them. He routed power from the cargo bay turrets, their work was done, and fed it to the engines. The freighter angled deeper into the interference band, toward a distortion gradient he had mapped months earlier. Beyond that gradient, past the worst of the sensor noise, open space began. And beyond open space, the sector relay buoys waited in a loose arc along the trade corridor. He needed the fleet close before he crossed that threshold. The coalition ships followed. Their formation widened. Smart. In the nebula's density, tight formations risked friendly fire without reliable targeting locks. The destroyers took flanking positions. Interceptors spread to cut escape vectors. Voshan watched from the Accord's will. He's running. Commander, he's moving toward the densest interference zone. At that depth, our targeting systems will degrade to manual operation. Then we close the distance and fire manually. He's one ship. One ship that just swallowed 3 boarding squads, Commander. Voshan didn't respond to that. Inside the Nomad's wrath, the corridors were still. The modular walls had locked into combat configuration. Narrowed passages, sealed redundancies, every system stripped to essentials. The ship breathed differently now. Tighter, leaner. Somewhere on the lower deck, sealed compartments registered vacuum. The modular corridors had reconfigured, isolated breach vectors, and vented atmosphere in controlled pulses. Internal sensors showed no active life signs. The ship had defended itself the way it had been built to. It did not keep prisoners. Croy activated the weapons archive. The display lit, not with targeting data but with records. Ship logs, colony transmissions, dates. Each weapon system aboard the Nomad's Wrath was cataloged, not by specification, by origin. Dren rotary turrets. Siege of Vethak. Recovered from the wreck of the Dren gunship Kalex Fury. The Dren sold targeting data on human refugee convoys to coalition forces during the war. The convoy was intercepted at Vethak. 4,200 civilians. The Dren gunships provided suppressive fire, while coalition troops boarded. Korvathi shield plating, enforcement action, Harrow's reach. Stripped from the hull of the KSS Unbroken after it was scuttled in orbit. The Unbroken fired the first bombardment salvo on the colony's residential district. Croy was in that district. Yashti sensor suite. Yashti blockade of Sol approach. Recovered from a derelict Yashti scout vessel. The Yashti maintained a sensor blockade around human space for 3 years after the treaty, preventing humanitarian supply runs. An estimated 12,000 humans died from supply shortages on outer colonies. Dren field harmonizer, contested salvage, wreck of the DSV Halkan. Recovered from a Dren science vessel abandoned in the graveyard of Keth after its crew stripped the drives and left the hull for scrap. The harmonizer was designed to synchronize incompatible energy fields for Dren mining operations. Croy repurposed it to bridge the gap between the Yashti jump core and the Korvathi power bus. The Dren had used the Halkan to survey human colony debris fields for salvageable resources. They cataloged the dead by mineral content. Every system, every piece of stolen technology. A cost attached, A name, a number, a date. The archive was the ship. The ship was the archive. Croy closed the display. There was nothing in it he didn't already know. The interceptor needle was the first to close within manual firing range. Its pilot, a Yashti named Soren Kahl, had disabled human vessels before. During the blockade, the scout ships had been easy prey. Small, underpowered, desperate. He remembered the last one. A converted cargo shuttle with no weapons and a crew of 3. They'd been running medical supplies to an outer colony, antibiotics mostly, and something for water purification. His orders were to disable and redirect. He'd disabled. The shuttle drifted for 6 days before a coalition patrol bothered to tow it in. The crew was dead by then. Dehydration. The water purifier had been for them too. Kahl had filed the report and moved on. That was 7 years ago. He locked onto the freighter's engine signature and fired a spread of guided munitions. The Nomad's Wrath didn't dodge. Its stern section rotated, the entire aft module twisting on a central axis that should not have existed in a standard freighter frame. The munitions passed through the space where the engines had been a half-second prior and detonated against nebula gas, flaring uselessly. It pivoted, Kahl reported, disbelief flattening his voice. Modular hull, Voshan's tactical officer said. The ship's frame isn't fixed. He can reconfigure the geometry of the vessel in flight. That's not possible. The structural stress alone. Commander, the ship is sustaining structural damage with every reconfiguration. He's tearing himself apart, but slowly. Voshan processed this. A ship that could reshape itself, built from the salvage of every species that had contributed to humanity's defeat, held together by engineering that shouldn't work but did, because the man flying it had 14 years and nothing else. All ships, close to point blank, overwhelm the reconfiguration speed. He can't dodge everything. They came in from 4 vectors. Croy met them with the Dren turrets first, rotary cannons firing from ports that opened in the hull and closed after each burst, the ship's skin sealing behind them like wounds healing in reverse. The turrets chewed into the lead interceptor's engine housing. It spun, venting atmosphere, and fell behind. The destroyer Talon's Edge fired its main battery, a heavy kinetic slug designed to crack fortified stations. The Nomad's Wrath took the hit on its starboard flank. The Korvathi plating there shattered. Beneath it, bare human steel, old, thin. The original freighter hull, exposed like bone under torn skin. The ship shuddered. Croy rerouted. Dren turrets cycling to cover the exposed flank. Yashti sensors compensating for the nebula interference, feeding him targeting data the coalition ships couldn't match because the Yashti had built those sensors specifically to operate in nebula conditions, and Croy had spent 3 years learning why. 3 years. Dismantling the Yashti sensor suite component by component in a cargo hold lit by a single emergency lamp. Learning the calibration language, translating the interface into something the human-coded network could interpret. The Yashti had designed the system to be species-locked, biometric authentication keyed to Yashti neural patterns. It had taken Croy 11 months to build a bypass. He'd burned out 2 of the 6 sensor nodes in the process, and those 2 were gone forever because there were no replacements. He operated the suite at 68% capacity. It was still better than anything the Coalition fleet carried for nebula operations because no one else had needed to fight in conditions this bad. No one else had needed to fight at all. That was the point of the treaty. He fired the Korvathi reactor into overdrive. The ship's stolen power core surged beyond its rated output. Bulkheads groaned. Somewhere in the lower decks, a conduit ruptured and vented plasma into an empty corridor. The temperature in the bridge rose 4 degrees in 2 seconds. Waste heat bleeding through the power bus. The Dren harmonizer struggling to regulate the flow between systems that were never designed to share a power source. The Nomad's Wrath accelerated. Not away. Through. The freighter drove directly between the two destroyers, close enough that their own weapons couldn't track it without hitting each other. As it passed the Talon's edge, a section of the ventral hull opened and released a single object, a Korvathi boarding mine, the kind used at Harrow's Reach to breach colony pressure seals. It attached to the destroyer's communications array and detonated. The Talon's edge went dark, not destroyed, silenced. "He's inside our formation," Voshan's tactical officer reported, with the particular calm of someone describing a disaster they cannot stop. He cut our comms relay. Talon's edge is offline. Needle is crippled. The second destroyer is repositioning, but override his ship. Voshan turned to the intelligence station. "He's running Korvathi reactor systems, Dren weapons, Yashti sensors. We built those systems. We have backdoor codes for all of them. Shut him down." The intelligence officer's hands moved fast. Coalition override protocols. Every species embedded kill codes in their military technology. Standard practice. Find the frequency. Send the code. Watch the stolen system die. The first override targeted the Dren turrets. The code transmitted. The turrets didn't shut down. They glitched, firing erratically for 2 seconds, then stabilizing. But not on Dren software. The targeting system had switched to a hybrid protocol, human-coded, patched over the original Dren architecture with something rougher, less elegant, but immune to the standard kill code. Override failed on weapons. Trying reactor. The Korvathi reactor override transmitted. The reactor fluctuated, power dropping for a heartbeat. Then, a secondary system kicked in. A human-built bypass, crude and bolted directly to the reactor housing, routing power around the compromised controls. "He's patched every system," the intelligence officer said. "Every stolen component has a human-coded override layer. He anticipated this." Of course he had. 14 years. Every system studied. Every backdoor mapped and sealed with human engineering that no coalition database contained, because human fleet doctrine had been classified and destroyed after the treaty. The intelligence officer ran a diagnostic on the failed override attempts. The data that came back made him sit very still. The human-coded layers weren't just patches. They were integrated at the firmware level, woven into the original code so deeply that separating them would require physical access to each component. The man hadn't just blocked the back doors. He'd made the stolen systems his. The Dren turrets ran Dren targeting algorithms, but they answered to human authority codes. The Korvathi reactor followed Korvathi power management protocols, but its kill switch had been rerouted through a human-built logic gate that simply didn't recognize Coalition commands. Every species in the Coalition had assumed their technology was sovereign. That theft was temporary. That the back doors made stolen equipment a liability for the thief. No one had accounted for a human with 14 years and nothing to do but learn. Voshan stared at the display. The freighter was damaged, trailing debris, its stolen armor cracking. But it was still fighting. Still moving. And then the Nomad's Wrath did something no one expected. It broadcast a signal. Not a weapon. Not a scan. A handshake protocol. Directed at every Coalition ship simultaneously. It spoke in their own languages. Korvathi machine code. Dren targeting syntax. Yashti navigational pings. The hybrid systems aboard the freighter weren't just patched. They were networked. A ship built from 5 species technology, running on human-coded integration, now speaking to the Coalition fleet's own systems in dialects they trusted. The Coalition ship's automated systems, trained to recognize friendly signals from their own species tech, opened handshake channels. And through those channels poured 14 years of noise. Not malware, not code. Raw data, uncompressed, unstructured. Sensor ghosts, false targeting data, phantom ship signatures, navigation conflicts. The cognitive chaos of 5 incompatible systems screaming at once through channels that the Coalition ship's own software had opened willingly. The Accord's Will's targeting array locked onto 3 ships that didn't exist. The second destroyer's navigation system plotted a collision course with the nebula's densest mass. Every interceptor received conflicting friend or foe tags. For 19 seconds, the Coalition fleet couldn't tell what was real. Croy used 12 of those seconds. He activated the hyperdrive. It wasn't a human drive. It wasn't any single species drive. It was a Yashti jump core spliced into a Korvathi power bus running through a Drenfield harmonizer. 3 systems that were never meant to touch, held together by human welding and human math and human stubbornness. The Nomad's wrath screamed, not a metaphor. The hull frequency shifted as incompatible energy fields tore at the frame. Plates buckled along the spine. The port cargo bay, where the sealed breech compartments had been, crumpled inward by half a meter. Atmosphere vented from 6 new breaches before emergency seals engaged. The jump drive spooled. The ship shook itself apart by fractions, and Croy, alone on a bridge held together by salvage and spite, watched the Coalition fleet scramble to reacquire targeting locks through the fading chaos, and punched the drive. The Nomad's wrath jumped. Behind it, a trail of hull debris and frozen atmosphere hung in the nebula like a scar. The jump was short. It had to be. The Nomad's wrath dropped out of hyperspace 47 seconds later, 18,000 kilometers from the nebula's edge, into open space, into range of every relay buoy in the sector. The ship was dying. Hull integrity had fallen below 40%. The hybrid jump drive had fused itself into a single molten mass in the engine housing, one use, as Croy had always known it would be. The Korvathi reactor was cycling at emergency minimums. Half the modular walls had locked in place, their actuators burned out. The Dren turrets on the port side were silent, their power feeds severed by the structural damage. The starboard turrets still functioned. The Yashti sensors still functioned. The communications array still functioned. That was enough. Croy opened the archive, not the weapons catalog. The other one. The one he'd spent 14 years assembling alongside every stolen component and patched system. The records. Coalition fleet communications from the Harrow's Reach action, orders to fire on civilian structures. Sensor logs showing the colony's defense militia had surrendered 6 hours before the bombardment began. Transport manifests proving the Coalition had blockaded evacuation routes before the first shot. Casualty reports that listed 40,000 dead under the header, acceptable enforcement losses. Yashti blockade records documenting supply interdiction to human outer colonies, with projected civilian mortality rates calculated in advance and approved. Korvathi military tribunal transcripts where the enforcement action was reviewed and classified, not because it was legal, but because exposure would destabilize the Coalition's founding justification. Every piece of it authenticated, time-stamped, verified against the stolen system's own internal logs, because the technology Croy had salvaged carried its own history in its memory cores, and he'd extracted every byte. He cued the broadcast. The Coalition fleet emerged from the nebula 4 minutes later. 5 ships, the Talon's edge still dark, the crippled interceptor abandoned. Voshan had pushed them hard. The Accord's Will led, its main batteries already charging. There! Voshan pointed at the display. The freighter hung in open space, barely moving, venting atmosphere from a dozen breaches. He jumped to escape. He's finished. Commander, he jumped to open space, within range of sector relay buoys. Voshan's expression didn't change, but his hands tightened on the command rail. He's broadcasting. Block it. We can't. He's transmitting on Korvathi military frequencies, Dren commercial bands, and Yashti diplomatic channels simultaneously. Our jamming can cover 1, maybe 2, not all 3. 3 species communication protocols, broadcast simultaneously from systems built by those species. The relay buoys were designed to prioritize signals that matched their own species' authentication codes. The Nomad's Wrath's patchwork systems authenticated on all 3. What is he sending? The intelligence officer pulled the data stream. His face went still. Harrow's reach action orders. Full chain of command. Bombardment targeting data showing the colony's surrender was received and acknowledged before the strike. He paused. Yashti blockade mortality projections. Korvathi classification tribunal records. The bridge of the Accord's will was silent. He has everything, the intelligence officer said. Voshan opened a direct channel. Narrowband. Ship to ship. Captain Croy. The channel hissed. Nebula interference still fouled the edges. Then a voice. Quiet, rough. The kind of voice that hadn't spoken to another person in a long time. Commander? You know what happens when that broadcast reaches the inner systems? Yes. The Coalition will deny it. They'll call it fabrication, pirate propaganda. The authentication codes are embedded in the transmissions. Every species will recognize their own encryption. They can deny it. They can't disprove it. Voshan stared at the drifting freighter. Atmosphere leaked from its wounds like slow exhalation. I could destroy you before the signal propagates. The relay buoys already have it. You're 4 minutes too late. Another silence, longer. What do you want, Croy? The treaty repealed? Human fleets restored? You're one man. I was one man at Harrow's Reach, too, when your ships fired on a colony that had already surrendered. That action was legally. I watched the shelters burn, Commander. Don't tell me what was legal. Voshan cut the channel. All batteries. Fire. The Accord's will unleashed its primary armament. At this range, in open space, with no nebula interference, the targeting was clean. Perfect. The first salvo struck the Nomad's Wrath's dorsal section. The remaining Korvathi shield plating, already cracked from the jump, disintegrated. Human steel beneath it peeled back. The upper decks opened to vacuum. Croy rerouted. Reactor power to the starboard Dren turrets. The guns spun up and fired, not at the flagship's hull, but at its main communications array. Precision targeting fed by Yashti sensors that could read a ship's electromagnetic signature like an anatomical chart. The rounds hit. The Accord's will's primary comms array shattered. Secondary arrays survived. Tertiary backup engaged. But the flagship's ability to coordinate fleet-wide jamming died with the primary array. The broadcast signal strengthened. Voshan felt it. The moment slipping. Interceptors. Target the relay buoys. Destroy them. The 2 remaining interceptors banked toward the nearest buoys. Fast ships. They'd reach them in 90 seconds. Croy saw it. He had 1 card left. The Nomad's Wrath's modular frame, half locked, half broken, still had 1 section that could move. The ship's central spine, the original human-built freighter keel, the one piece that wasn't stolen or salvaged. His. He rotated the entire vessel on its spine axis. The freighter groaned, hull fractures widening, but it turned, bringing its remaining starboard guns to bear on the interceptor's flight path. The Dren turrets fired, sustained. Every round left in the magazines. The lead interceptor caught a burst across its engine nacelle. It tumbled, drive failing, and fell off course. The second interceptor juked, took a glancing hit, kept flying. It would reach the relay buoys. Croy fired until the turrets clicked empty. The second interceptor was damaged, trailing smoke, but still on course. He looked at the reactor output. The Korvathi core was at 11%, enough to keep life support running for another hour. Maybe. Not enough for weapons. Not enough for thrust. He opened the archive one more time. Not the broadcast, that was already gone, propagating at light speed through relay buoy networks toward the inner systems. Every species' intelligence apparatus would have it within hours. The authentication codes would take days to verify, weeks to deny, months to suppress, if suppression was even possible. The other archive, the one stored in the ship's deepest memory core, human fleet doctrine, tactical manuals, engineering schematics, navigation charts of routes the Coalition had never mapped. 14 years of a dead man's work, rebuilding everything the treaty had tried to erase. The second salvo from the Accord's will hit. The lower decks collapsed. The reactor housing cracked. Power failed across the ship in a cascading wave. Lights dying section by section. Systems going dark. The modular walls finally freezing in whatever position they'd last held. The archive drives were in the lower decks. Croy felt the ship die beneath him, the way you feel a limb go numb. Section by section, system by system, the Dren turrets, the Yashti sensors, the Korvathi shielding, every stolen piece breaking apart, leaving the original hull, human steel, scarred, thin, still holding. The second interceptor reached the nearest relay buoy, fired. The buoy exploded. The pilot turned toward the next one. There were 6 in the sector. It didn't matter. The signal had already reached 3 of them before the first was destroyed. 3 was enough. The network was built for redundancy. The broadcast was in the system. On the bridge of the Accord's will, Voshan stared at the remains of the Nomad's wrath. The freighter was dark, unpowered, drifting. Its stolen armor was gone, shattered, burned, stripped away by weapons fire and structural failure. What remained was the skeleton, a human-built cargo freighter, old and small and bare. Life signs? 1, faint, bridge section. The hull is intact there, but he has no power, no weapons, no propulsion. And the broadcast? Silence. It's in the relay network, Commander. Sector-wide propagation is underway. Voshan stood very still. The freighter drifted. 1 man. No fleet. A ship made of everything the Coalition had taken from humanity, now reduced to the bare human frame it had always been underneath. Commander, orders? Do we finish it? Voshan looked at the wreck, at the colony census photo still on his display. A dead man who wasn't dead, in a dead ship that had just torn the Coalition's founding lie open for the entire galaxy to read. Recover the boarding troops if any survived. Set course for Cathara Station. We need to be ahead of this. And the freighter? Leave it. The Accord's will turned. The fleet followed. The Nomad's wrath drifted in silence. No power, no atmosphere in most sections. The stolen systems, Dren, Korvathi, Yashti, all of it, were dead weight now. Broken. Burned. The archive drives in the lower decks were slag. On the bridge, emergency lighting flickered from a battery that had maybe 20 minutes left. Croy sat in the pilot's chair, human-made, bolted to a human-made deck, in a human-made hull, and breathed recycled air that tasted like copper and smoke. The console was dark. But before the power died, he'd seen the relay confirmation. 3 buoys. Full propagation. The galaxy would know. Not everything. Not the fleet doctrine. Not the engineering archives. Those were gone. Burned with the ship. But the truth about Harrow's reach. The truth about the blockade. The truth about what the treaty was built to hide. That was enough. That was always what this was for. He leaned back. The emergency battery ticked down. The hull creaked. Thermal contraction as the ship cooled in open space. A familiar sound. He'd lived with it for 14 years. In the silence, the short-range receiver, a simple unit, human-built, drawing almost no power, clicked. A signal? Faint. Encrypted on a frequency that hadn't been used since before the treaty. Old human fleetcom protocol. Dead protocol. No one used it anymore. No one should have been able to use it. The signal was short. No voice. Just a navigation ping. A set of coordinates in the Forbidden Sector. The region of space the Coalition had quarantined after the war, where human fleet remnants had supposedly been destroyed. And a call sign. Then another. Then 4 more. Croy stared at the receiver. 6 call signs. 6 ships. Fleet protocol encoding that matched doctrine he'd thought only he remembered. The Nomad's wrath was finished. Its stolen weapons were scrap. Its archive was ash. The man who flew it had nothing left but a hull and a chair and air that was running out. But the signal kept repeating. 6 call signs in the dark. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 14 years, the ghost smiled.